Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Not much going on. Took my first COVID test yesterday, at-home saliva-based one. They're free here in here in New Jersey. So that was fun. No big reason to take it, but I figure it'd be good to know, have a baseline. It's not an antibody test, so I won't know if I've already had it, but I'll let you know next week when I get the results back. But enough about me. Let's get to this week's guest. John Vercher joins us this time around. He is the author of a fantastic novel that came out last year called 3/5. It's from Agora, or Agora if you're going with the ancient Greek pronunciation, the new imprint of Polis Books, and it's a really great read. Here's the book description, which sums it up pretty well. 3/5 is about a biracial black man passing for white who is forced to confront the lies of his past while facing the truth of his present when his best friend, just released from prison, involves him in a hate crime. I will add that the best friend is white and went Aryan Nation in prison, so it's not as easy as having the protagonist say, "Hey man, there's something I need to tell you." 3/5 is a really taut novel, diving deep into its characters' psychologies and pathologies, while maintaining a tense plot, depicting working life in the service industry, and most importantly, exploring issues of race and representation in America. Also, it uses the lead character's love of superhero comics from the 80s as a way of conveying their psyches and motivations in a way that I found utterly compelling, and which John and I get into in the conversation. It's set in 1995 Pittsburgh, so this is all long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe took over the world. It's also in the midst of the O.J. trial and the aftermath of the Rodney King riots in L.A., and a world without cell phones or the internet. At times, it's like visiting another country. But in other ways, especially around issues of race, it's as timely as turning on the news. Anyway, pal of the podcast, Garrett Zecker, suggested John and 3/5 to me a few weeks ago, and I'm awfully thankful he did. This was a heck of a debut novel. John's got a pretty interesting story leading up to writing it, so Garrett, thank you, and let's get to the conversation. Now, as caveats go, John's mic was a little muted, so I bumped the gain up on that after doing the rest of my processing, so it might sound a little bit, muffled or something. Here's John's bio from the flap copy for 3/5. There's a more extensive version at his website, johnvercherauthor.com, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes for this one. John Virture is a writer currently living in the Philadelphia area with his wife and 2 sons. He holds a bachelor's in English from the University of Pittsburgh and an MFA in creative writing from the Mountain View Master of Fine Arts program. His fiction has appeared in Akashic Books' Mondays Are Murder and Fry Sci-Fi, and he is a contributing writer for Cognoscenti, the Thoughts and Opinions page of WBUR Boston. 2 of his essays published there on race, identity, and parenting were picked up by NPR, and he has appeared on WBUR's Weekend Edition. His nonfiction has also appeared in Entropy magazine. You can find John on Twitter at jverch75. His debut novel is 3/5. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with John Vircher. Where did 3/5 begin for you, and how did it evolve over the years?
It started back when I was a student at the University of Pittsburgh as an undergraduate. I had taken a course called I'm actually not sure if I remember the name, but it was History of Black Cinema, and one of the movies that we watched was Imitation of Life, based on the book of the same name, and it was my first introduction to the tragic mulatto passing narrative. And as a biracial black man, it obviously spoke to me in a lot of ways. And so I became fascinated with that mode of storytelling, and the whole concept of passing was new to me. I didn't know that it had a name or that it was a thing, honestly.
Hmm.
And so I sought out more books of that nature, and found that there, at least in my own searches, that there weren't that many. And I was heavily into film at that time, and decided that maybe I wanted to write a screenplay with this kind of story in mind. And so the idea was sort of born then, although it wasn't the story that the novel became. So, to try and make a long story a little shorter, I was I wrote a screenplay. It got shopped around to a couple of production companies. Didn't go anywhere. I was really young. The writing was not fantastic, and then when I graduated, I ended up going into healthcare, sort of following in my parents' footsteps. Didn't really sort of left the writing life behind, and did that for about 10 years. So as I was in healthcare, I was realizing that it was just something I had done because it, would allow me to pay bills and eat, where
Yeah.
an English degree might, especially at that time, really wasn't going to do much for me. And so as time went on, I was realizing how much I missed being creative. And with a very supportive and loving wife, told me to do something about that because it was clear that I was unhappy. And she actually encouraged me to go back for my MFA because I felt like I had forgotten everything there was to know about craft and mechanics and all of that kind of stuff. And so I did, but they required a writing sample, and I hadn't written anything in years. And so she said, "Well, why don't you novelize your screenplay idea?" And that's what I did, at least for 20 pages, and it was enough to get me in. And the 3/5 actually ended up being my thesis for my MFA.
I want to ask on one side, what you had to learn as a writer in terms of the MFA and what it sort of brought back to you, but also what did you learn as an older man returning to the story you wrote back in your college years? And
That
how
that
did that breadth of experience, I guess, inform the book it became?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think I'm very fortunate that things happened the way they did, because that experience did bring much more emotional resonance to what I had written before. I think, I had gone for so much shock and awe in the story in the first place, in its first iteration. And so the passage of almost 20 years made just brought so much more lived experience to the work. So yeah, that was crucial. As to the part about the MFA, it really just disabused me of a lot of old bad habits that I had, maybe not even things that I had learned as an English major in as an undergrad. Just even basics of not relying so heavily on adverbs and adjectives, and
Mm-hmm.
just tightening up dialogue. And there are just so many things about craft and mechanics that I had either forgotten or had not learned in undergraduate writing, that really
Yeah,
helped put a polish on it.
yeah. I was going to ask, how much of writing have you found ties into reps. The things that you may have known technically in college, you didn't really integrate until writing became, a steady process for you.
I think it all comes down to reps. You're exactly right. The more I wrote, the better I got. It's one of those things where even looking back on 3/5 now, there's things I would have done differently. But it's I think that's a universal writer's lament, right? I mean, we even the things that we're lucky enough to get published, we'll look back years later and go, "Oh God, like why 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 did I ever put that out for public consumption?" So yeah,
Yeah.
the reps are crucial.
Which we'll get to a later question of how this ties into your martial arts practice, but I figure we should stick with the novel for a while first. But that only came about because I went to your Instagram feed. But one of the questions I had about 3/5 and just the decision to place it in 1995. It's an era where there's no internet, there's barely a cell phone concept out there. And it's also, it seems, the backdrop, without being super explicit, is the OJ trial still going on. How significant was, picking 1995 and that particular point in time for placing the novel?
I did it for a couple of reasons. One, because I wanted to convey how these topics and these issues are timeless, unfortunately. I've had a lot of feedback that the book is really timely, and which is, my pushback to that every time is, well, no, this is just because this seems to be happening now when this book is out. You have to realize that this is nothing new. None of what we're experiencing right now is new. It's very cyclical, and for myself and other people of color, this is Monday. It's not it's nothing has really changed for us. So that was part of that. It also, just from an emotional level, I was able to go back and access how I felt during that time, which was a time in my life where I was also having questions about identity. Certainly not in a passing way, but growing up mixed race, there's a lot of soul searching and identity searching. I've said before that when you're asked often enough, "What are you?" you start to ask that question of yourself, and so a lot of that was happening at that time. So it made sense to me to kind of reach back to some of those experiences to try to convey that emotion in the book.
Yeah, it's a weird thing as a white guy from the suburbs. Back in 2000, I used to publish books by Samuel Delany, the science fiction writer, fantasy guy, and scholar, etc. But he is very light-skinned black. And when I mentioned to him Philip Roth's new novel, The Human Stain, back in 2000, which is about a black professor who's been passing his whole life, Delany blew up at me in a not a rage, but he just, "How dare Philip write about this? Passing is not real. This is not a," and he just went on and on and on. I had no idea about how vituperative a reaction that could evoke. And how fraught it is, I guess, in terms of literary construction and that whole sense of identity. So I guess the question is, how challenging was it as a topic for you to address? Is it something within your family or community that was almost taboo as a topic to talk about?
Not in my family or community, because it was never an issue. I mean, it was I was raised by my father to be very, very proud of my blackness, so that was never a concern. Where identity became an issue was more trying to find acceptance from either side. I because I didn't really fit the stereotypes for either group. I talk a different way than expected. I listen to all different types of music. There were just all these boxes that people wanted to put me in which I didn't fit. So that portion of it was very real and but not taboo. I mean, we certainly talked about it. I had a lot of conversations with both my mother and father about it. It's interesting to me that he had such a reaction to it. I mean, I can see the reaction of Roth writing that. I mean, I've read that book, and it's there are certainly some things that within that book that you can tell he's sort of writing from a tourist's perspective.
Yeah.
It's not he really doesn't have the lived experience of that. But to say that it doesn't exist, it's true. It probably doesn't happen nearly as much as it did in the era where it was a means of survival for people. But that's interesting to hear that he was so
I
angered
was
by it.
totally taken off guard. I was, because I never heard him that, pissed off about something. And maybe it was more the tourist aspect of it. But as I recall, he was irate at the whole idea that passing would become this literary device. Now, just as my question with 3/5 was, for someone writing a debut novel, balancing plot, character, social impact, and bringing it all together in such a concise package, I'm full of rage and vituperation that you pulled this off so goddamn well. What sort of literary upbringing did you have, and is being able to balance all of those aspects, again, just something that sort of fits your mode of writing previously, or is this all sort of uncharted territory for you?
I think the short answer to that is yes.
and I am accustomed to these long and rambling semi questions. Sorry.
No. It's not a semi question. There's a little bit of yes to all of those things. What I've been thinking about a lot lately is how much one of the other benefits of the MFA for me was how much more reading it got me back to doing, and reading the things that I should have been reading all along and should have been encouraged to read all along, which was more Black authors. It was, I hadn't, as is true in, unfortunately, most education, Black authors and Black writers are not given the same access. Kids and students aren't given the same access to those
Sure.
incredible works, and so a lot of that came later in life for me. So in terms of what I've read that maybe influenced the conciseness of that book. I mean, part of that has to do with my editor as well, but the shorter books of Ernest Gaines and James Baldwin, those books that are just over or just under 200 pages, but pack far more emotional heft than books twice their length. Those were always amazing to me because they at the end of 200 pages, it felt like you had just read an epic novel.
Yeah.
More recently, Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys has that same effect. I mean, it's 210 pages, and it felt like one of the longest books, not in terms of it dragged, but it just, you had a hangover after reading it. Like you couldn't stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, pretty well. That question then of working within the crime genre and being the launch title for a new imprint focused on diversity in voices in crime fiction. Working within was there any trepidation, I guess, working within something that's quote unquote genre fiction? Because I read it and I'm fine with whatever form stuff takes. My big literary experience in the last year has been John le Carré spy novels. So, I'm fine with, if it's good writing, it's good writing. But
well, and that's always been my take. I was kind of surprised that this was a crime novel. I didn't set out to write a crime book. It, I've found since being in that community that the the term is actually kind of loose.
Yeah.
Crime can, for example, Lauren Wilkinson's amazing book American Spy. I would have never considered that a crime novel, but it's been nominated for a number of crime awards. So while I didn't set out to write it, I'm perfectly comfortable being within the genre. I don't. My thing is, expectations might be uh, um, false for me because I don't plan on. If there's anybody I would like to emulate, it would be Colson Whitehead, because the man seems to categorically defy genre. I mean, he's written zombie books, he's written historical magical realism. I mean, and they're all fantastic. So it's great that this has been so accepted by the crime community. But I don't want people to expect that that's all that I'll write.
That's actually what I was going to ask next. So I'm glad to get that question out of the way, and instead get to the question of meeting your idols. Have you gotten to meet any Colson Whiteheads or other authors whom you idolize? And of course,
No,
have you melted down in their presence?
no, I haven't met any of them, and I'm one of those people that I'm not sure that I want to. Like I've
Yeah.
communicated with a lot of writers that I admire and whose work I admire, via Twitter and other social media outlets. But I don't know. There's always a danger to me in meeting your idols. Like
Yeah.
there's you create unrealistic expectations, and then if they don't for some reason meet them, then just things don't go well for you. So
Yeah.
I think the way I've been able to communicate with writers now is perfectly fine. If I get to meet them, fantastic, but never something I seek to do, really.
Cool. And your interaction with readers? I know this came out, 3/5 came out shortly before, well, in the before time, as we now know it. But at least when you were doing signings and readings, being on that side of the table, I guess, what was that experience like for you?
Well, initially surreal. I mean, it just there at no point a year ago could you have told me I would have published a book, let alone seen it in a bookstore, then let alone be signing books for people. I mean, that's still just. I'm glad I have pictures of it, because otherwise I don't think I would have believed it. It happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible, and the interaction with readers has really been amazing. I mean, I've gotten so many kind things have been said about it, that and personal things. I've gotten emails from readers. I got to talk to some people at signings where they really, that they came from a mixed race family, or they're from a mixed race marriage. Like there's just they shared such personal stuff, and it was really that had been my goal with this book, was really to generate conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
that it did that, even for a small number of people, as cliche as that might sound. The fact that it touched one person, that really does matter.
Had you noticed any, well, characterizing black or biracial readers' response versus response from white readers? Not in a, antagonistic way, but, do they differ in ways that you've noticed?
Not particularly, no. It's
Okay.
been the people that like it have been all across the board, and the reasons they like it seem to have been the same. Um, Same for the people that don't like it. Yeah, I haven't seen a difference. No.
Mhm. And this will be another overarching broad question. Besides, the fact that you're capable of finishing a novel, what else did you learn about yourself in the process of writing this?
It's a good question. I it was There was definitely some self-discovery involved,
Mm.
and realizing that I still do have some questions, and still do in some ways seek to fill the boxes people create for you, even though I don't really want to do that. There's still
Sure.
something of that kid in you that wants to make everybody happy. And so I think, I while I wrote the book to create conversations, I also wrote it selfishly for myself to explore some of those questions. I didn't answer any of them, but it was an exercise in continuing to explore those questions, and and finding ways to continue to have those conversations with people, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, had you known anyone who passed or otherwise, I'd hate to say suspected, but people that you thought, I'm not 100% on this guy?
Mm.
Or again, is your construction of it sort of based on the both your literary background in it and imagination?
Yeah, no, I've been asked that before. Like Bobby's not really based on any one person. He's really sort of a composite of, as you said, some of the things that I had read, and then elements of experiences that I had had in my life, and that other friends had.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to debut novel, you got significant praise, and even the mention in Chicago Tribune and such for one of the best books of the year. Were there blurbs that like seriously knocked you out, like things that you started to see either in reviews or in the pre-press that wow, I didn't think somebody was going to say that about this?
Is it fair to say every one of them? I mean, again, I thought this thing was going to sit on my hard drive forever. I never, ever expected that it would get published. I mean, I hoped. I was going to try. I was going to make everyone possible tell me no, but that it received any of this kind of reception is still amazing to me. Like I had that conversation with my wife just recently. Like don't I still haven't processed all of it. It's been incredible.
And you afraid you'll get spoiled by the experience?
Oh no, 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 no.
Okay.
That's I like I'm the second book is now with my agent, and hopefully going on submission soon. And it's like I will be just as excited when somebody's
Nice.
interested in it again. Like there is still the feeling that this one is just going to sit on the hard drive as well.
Yeah.
So I'm taking this one thing at a time, and I'm reveling in what's happening now, and
Cool.
the experience has been amazing.
Yeah. When you talked about the sending it out everywhere you could, the first book, had you put any sort of deadline, midlife demarcation point or anything on writing?
No, but
Did you mentally have any sort of, this is the point at which I will surrender and.
oh no, no, I'm too dumb for that. Like
Okay.
yeah, I'm sort of stupidly tenacious. So it was like again, but I wasn't going to write another one. I had to get
Mhm.
this one out. Like that was it for me. Like I know that there are other authors have talked about their their first published book was actually like their third or fourth book that they had written.
Yeah. Which
And
always blows my mind.
I
The
couldn't.
rejection would have just killed me. Yeah.
Well, and there trust me, there were rejections aplenty on this one, but it was too personal. It was too important to me, that the subject matter, that I couldn't let it go. Like I had to exhaust every option possible.
And choosing to set it in Pittsburgh, I know that's where you went to college, as you'd said. Are there aspects of racial dynamics in Pittsburgh specifically, based on places where you've lived, that render it unique? Or was it just a place you were familiar with and one to work on? I just don't know the city particularly well, so I don't know if there's a connotation, I guess.
I mean, so even though I was there for 6 years, I still sort of consider myself a tourist of the city. But I have a lot of affection for the city. I mean, I felt like I did a lot of growing up there at that time. So it was, again, it was because I was there in '95. It felt right to put it there at that time. Especially because the OJ trial happened so closely on the heels of the unrest in LA. The racial conversation was on the tip of everyone's tongue everywhere. And if I recall correctly, Pittsburgh at that time was particularly having some police issues. Not that they weren't always, but they were heightened during that time. And so it felt like a natural place to put the story.
And then you move to the perfect police utopia of Philadelphia.
Just
kidding. Which has no history whatsoever.
No, not at all. No.
Yeah. And this is the white guy asking this question in as open-ended a way as possible. Tell me about the protests and how what do you see? How is it impacting you? I'm already saying too much. Tell me about the protests that are going on nowadays.
Well, it's very telling that they're still going on, but they're not getting news because nothing violent is happening. It's the same old story all over again, where unless windows are being broken and there's quote unquote looting going on, then the news isn't interested. They don't want to highlight the peaceful protests. So that is maddening. Um, they need to be happening, but again, it's so much of this is cyclical. We have to figure out how we stop getting here, and that requires another kind of work. Besides the protests, there's conversations that need to be had. Changing the power structure, which is ultimately necessary and has to be done. We also have to figure out a way, not just to get the racists out of power, but then how do we get rid of racism, right? I mean, it's more than just pushing them out and sending them into hiding. We've got to start to work to try and actually dismantle the ideologies and the thought processes, and that's a long, arduous task, but it has to be done because otherwise we're going to end up here again.
Yeah. Do you see this current cycle, as we'll say, as being, again, this is awful language, as being more productive than ones in the past?
It's funny. I went to my dad for perspective about that. I mean, my father grew up in Jim Crow, Louisiana, so he's seen that. He's seen Watts. He's seen L.A. and now this. So I really wanted his perspective on it because talk about lived experience.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we're seeing things happen that we haven't seen in the past, right? I mean, we're seeing arrests come in, although we're still waiting on those Breonna Taylor arrests. We're seeing a lot of symbolic things happen. The pulling down of statues, the changing of flags, all those type of things. But even paraphrasing Malcolm X, they'll hand you some symbolic gestures to keep you quiet or to appease you, but without fostering any real change. So while those things are good and necessary, need to happen, again, there's more we need to do to deconstruct these ideologies. So
Yeah.
yes, it's productive. There's progress, but we got to keep going.
That's what I was sort of wondering, because again, my perspective is limited in that respect. That things that look like progress can still, on the inside seem like, yeah, that's nice that you're saying X, Y, and Z, or you've stopped advertising on this racist platform, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole lot more that needs doing. What part of Louisiana? Where's your dad from?
Alexandria.
Okay. My wife's people are from Des Allemands, about 40 minutes outside New Orleans. So
Oh, okay.
I always check. Yeah. Because Louisiana's a big and weird state.
Yeah.
And a state of mind on top of everything else. Do you have a writing practice at this point? Do you have routines and rhythms that you get into with writing?
No, I think I'm still trying to figure them out because the
Mm-hmm.
MFA was it produced sort of a necessary discipline, right? I mean, we had deadlines, we had things that had to be turned in by a certain time period, which is a deadline. I don't know why I decided to define deadline, but it definitely gave me a practice then. For the second book, it was more about just writing when I could find the time, as a father and as a husband, and then working from home and all of the things that come with that. But you know, I have my wife and I are partners in all things, and so she helps me find the time to do that when I need to, and vice versa when she's got her work to do. So, um, long answer short, no actual, no prescriptive practice, just trying to get the ass in the chair when I can.
Gotcha. And pandemic life, how big an adjustment has it been for you? And and what did you learn didn't really matter that much? Things that you thought mattered, turns out, that's not really that important anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of a homebody anyway, anyway. So it
Same here.
wasn't, I mean, my wife and I like to go to dinner from time to time, and we'd like to take the kids to parks and things like that. But yeah, I mean, when it was like, oh, we can't go out to eat, it was like, oh, all right. I mean, I don't know. We always try to keep things in perspective, and the whole stuck at home notion was like, well, yeah, but I get it. I have a home to be stuck in, and there's so many
Yeah,
people that don't. So
right.
how can I even begin to be upset or complain because I'm slightly inconvenienced? I mean, like the it taught me that, uh, yeah, the to your point, the things that for some seem to matter a whole hell of a lot don't really. I'm healthy.
Yeah,
I got my family around me. I'm doing way better than a lot of others, and that's sad to say, but um, it keeps it in perspective.
understood. Place you do really want to go to though? Not necessarily restaurant, just thing you'd want to do if it was safe to go out and be among people.
Well, I miss jujitsu, but
Yeah.
it's you talk about being completely unable to social distance. that
Yeah.
that is not a
By
that is not an
definition.
art where you can, and it's not one where you can wear a mask. So,
Yeah.
I know some schools have reopened, but my wife works in healthcare, and I can't take that risk
No.
of either getting them sick or bringing something home for her to take to her patients. It just doesn't, not worth the risk.
Yeah. Understood. Where'd martial arts begin for you?
I think it was high school. So freshman year of high school, I started taking Taekwondo. I wasn't, even though I'm taller now, I seem to like stop growing in high school for a while. And then like once I
Huh.
got to college, maybe started growing again. So team sports just weren't a thing for me. They were when I was in grade school and things like that, but not once I got to high school. And so, I was a kid that was obsessed with martial arts from God as long as I can remember. I'd be sitting watching kung fu theater every Saturday after Saturday morning cartoons were over. So it had always been something that fascinated me. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I've been kind of a lifelong martial artist.
And ways that training or practice inform writing?
Mostly the discipline aspect.
Yeah.
It's the sitting down and writing even when you don't feel like it. Although I'm not always a huge proponent of that. Like there are times where if I'm just not in the groove, writing writing crap doesn't make me feel like I've gotten something accomplished. Like if I'm just not feeling it, if the vibe's not there when I sit down, or if the words just aren't coming, then I don't do it. But the discipline overall to keep forging forward, even when you feel like you're not having your best days. I think a lot of that came from martial arts, because so much about martial arts is failure, right? It's uh, you learn when you lose, as cliche as that all sounds. But so to have the discipline to keep going back and losing in order to learn, I think really informs writing.
And the big question, which I've been putting off because we could probably nerd out over this pretty extensively, your background in comics?
I was wondering
Because
when we were going to get to this.
Jonathan Gray and I, 2 weeks ago, it turned out he and I grew up on the exact same run of Claremont and Byrne, X-Men, and everything else from that era onwards. And
Yes.
it was out of like 400 episodes, the nerdiest one I've ever posted. So I'm a little older than you, I think, but what's your comics history and your background in it?
Man, I've been like waiting for this moment. Like some people like I've talked to, they kind of touch on the comic book aspect of it, but I'm like, when is somebody going to want to talk about the comic books? So finally.
I think the way you integrated into 3/5 felt so completely natural to me that I have no idea if it makes sense to anyone who's not me. Like the way the superhero references come in, I'm like, those completely fit the narrative and the thought processes these characters are going through. And I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but I thought you integrated it so perfectly. It was great.
So. Thank you. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's why I haven't talked about it with anybody else. So history, I remember very clearly the first comic book I ever got was the Marvel version of Indiana Jones.
God, yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, my mom and I were on a train ride to Pittsburgh, and I must have been bugging the hell out of her. So she's like, "Let's go get you something to read." And the train car there was a train car that had like if I'm remembering this correctly, maybe train cars didn't have this, and I'm thinking, but we got it somewhere else. But I thought I remembered there being like almost like a concession stand in one of the train cars, and there was a comic book rack, and I knew who Indiana Jones was, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna pick that up. And man, from that moment on, that was the biggest mistake she ever made, because I was buying them. Any little cent I could, every bit of allowance, any money I could earn went immediately into comic books. They even put a limit on me, and I didn't tell them this until I was an adult, that when I used to go buy them and they would check to make sure I only bought two, I would buy four, but I would slip one inside the back cover of another. And like, I know at some point they had to go, how is this box getting so full of comics when you're only supposed to buy two? But they never called me on it. So,
did they have the at least he's reading thing, or were comics pretty much,
yeah.
okay. Because there is that side of it, but there's also are you going to finally graduate into prose and
No, nope. That was luckily never the case. They always really fostered my love of comics, because I used to draw as well. I swore I was going to be a Marvel Comics artist at some point.
Well, that was, I had Keith Henry Brown on a couple of weeks ago, this illustrator, and his whole thing as a kid was, I'm going to make it at Marvel Comics. And he does by the time he's like 20 or 21, and then discovers this really isn't for me. Now, this is late 70s, early 80s. He's like, yeah, this turns out this isn't what I wanted to do, and goes off into a completely different, illustration world, design, art directing. I'll send you a link to that episode because it's actually kind of a neat conversation around this stuff.
I'd love to hear that.
No, depending on how much we're supposed to think the characters are stand-ins for you in 3/5, were you a Marvel guy or DC in
Oh, it
that
was
sort of
very much Marvel.
1980s run?
Very much
Okay.
Marvel. Yeah, I to this day I'm still not a DC guy. I do like Image, especially what Image has evolved into. You know,
Hmm.
there's so many of those creator-owned properties. You know, the early days of Spawn and Savage Dragon and all that stuff, Wildcats, like those were great. But you know, they've put out some serious what I call issue comics. You know, there was one of the best ones I read recently was I think it was called Infidel, which was sort of like
Hmm.
this social commentary slash horror comic that I mean they're just putting out that kind of stuff with fantastic writing and really good art. Yeah, I mean Saga is another one that they put out that I think is just fantastic. Uh, so yeah.
I'd say the one positive about my doing these shows remotely is that I can surreptitiously type in things on the browser and look them up. And I just found Infidel, and it does look pretty goddamn impressive,
Oh, it's amazing.
especially because it's got the guy from Promethea, that Alan Moore book,
Yes.
working on it. So because I was a Alan Moore geek once the mid 80s hit, Swamp Thing, and then the Watchmen and the stuff they brought in from the UK, V for Vendetta and
Mm-hmm.
Miracle Man. But yeah, I was Claremont and Byrne X-Men, Frank Miller's Daredevil, and
Mm.
then The Dark Knight, and his later Daredevil run with David Mazzucchelli. I'm
Yes.
49 this year, so it's weird for those just a couple of year age gradients to matter, but it's when you came across certain comics, I guess. It's the sort of thing that means a lot. Your kids into the form,
Oh yeah,
into comics?
they didn't have a choice. Because I'm still such a geek about it. I mean, the whole everything they've done with the MCU has just been like, oh, I mean, like I'm a kid again. It's
Yeah.
so they've seen all the Marvel movies. They watch the DC movies. My son JJ is now reading graphic novels or smaller ones that are made for his age
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Marvel has put out. So yeah, no, they're 100% into it.
And do you remember instances of black characters in the comics? And is that something that resonated with you when you were young?
It resonated with me that there weren't a lot, and that the ones that were there tended to be stereotypes. Uh,
Yeah.
Falcon was really one of the more refreshing characters um, because he
Do you
seemed.
remember the dolls, the Mego dolls
Yep,
for him?
yep. Not
Where he
only
was
that, but I
literally
had
winged black superhero was
yeah,
the
yeah.
the
Oh God,
subhead.
that's
So,
right. Well,
yeah,
I'm thinking back to the Secret Wars characters, the action figures. Those
yeah.
are the ones I had with the little
Oh,
holographic
yeah, again, I'm just a
shields
couple of
and
years older, so
uh,
yeah, these are the ones in the 70s that were terrible. But
yeah,
they
yeah.
weren't dolls; they were action figures. Okay.
Right. Oh, sorry. Excuse. Yes. Well, no. I think I said action
Yeah.
figures, didn't I?
Yeah, I know. That's just the defensiveness we all had to have for that stuff.
um, yeah. I mean, those toys weren't on the shelves, right? I mean, those characters weren't major properties, even though you had comics like Black Panther and Power Man and Iron Fist. But you know, Luke Cage. Thank God that character has evolved somewhat to not being what he was then. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean, there really wasn't a lot of that, and so I I make sure to expose my boys to more of those characters and more of those, as much as they can with the kids versions of the books. Which again, it would be nice to see them give as much focus on those characters as they are now doing in the adult books. Although I will say that it's the books that he's reading now. Black Panther has a much larger presence than he used to, even in the original adult comics. So they're 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 getting better. You can
Yeah.
see that there is a push towards progress. I mean, my boys are head over heels for Miles Morales as far as they're concerned. He's Spider-Man, not Peter Parker.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been the seeing this stuff and seeing how it changes. Well, it's like that author who I mentioned, Samuel Delany, when Star Wars came out in 77, he wrote a piece in one of the science fiction magazines about the white universe it posits. And people blew up at him, who were not racially progressive, because they felt this was their universe and he could have his own story somewhere else. And it was, that realization that, what looks fine from the inside to people, you realize somebody coming from another perspective is going to see it very, very differently. So,
Absolutely.
But when it comes to comics, the fact that you used to draw and your career now as a novelist, is your secret dream to write for Marvel, DC, Image?
Yeah.
Yeah.
or for myself. I actually have a pitch that I worked with. I actually took a lit reactor class with Alex Segura, who I've gotten to know through the crime community. And I do have a full graphic novel pitch, and I'm currently working with an artist to hopefully bring that pitch to a creator-owned property like Image. So and my agent is aware of it, and he's actually worked with some other writers who also do graphic novels. So yeah, I'm pushing to make that dream come true as well. And as we said before, I'm stupidly tenacious, so I will
Good.
keep working on it.
Yeah, how much beyond the writing craft, the imagination and creativity and everything else, how much of writing for you is the professional activities? Like the Lit Hub courses, like having to learn how to pitch, and finding an agent initially, all that professional side of things, and how much of it did you not know going into it was going to entail?
If I had a complaint about the MFA education, is that I don't think I was prepared for any of that side of it, and I don't know if other MFA programs prepare authors for that either. It was very much learn as I go, look it up where I can, trial and error, a lot of error. So in terms of the course that I took for the comic pitch, I mean that there is a very big difference in the way you pitch comics versus a query letter for a book.
Sure.
So that was just kind of a necessary education. But I haven't taken a lot of other sort of strict classwork to figure out the ins and outs of this. A lot of it is relying on the kindness of those who came before you, and hoping that they'll share information, which so many have. I mean, I've met some amazingly generous people in the writing community that really want to help other writers get to where they are.
You're going to see a couple of years are going to be saying the same thing about you.
I certainly hope so. I'm actually teaching a virtual class next week, I'm sorry, in 2 weeks, about this very topic, because there not only is it difficult for writers to figure out this stuff in general, but it's really hard for writers of color. And so we're actually doing a focused ask me anything type of virtual seminar about my path to publication and anything I can do to help people of color demystify that journey. So I absolutely want to pay it forward because a lot of people did it for me.
Yeah, had you, I say, been warned, I guess, going in about what the challenges would be like, or do you feel like you happen to luck into a good path, working with Agara and Polis?
Warned, yes, certainly, yeah. It's and definitely lucked into it as well. I mean, yeah, I was very. It was things really kind of aligned. The stars in the universe really came together to help the situation with Agora come to fruition. So yeah, I would say I was given plenty of advice as long as I sought it out.
And are you capable of working on a third novel while you're waiting for the second one to make it through the process? Or
not really. Well, so
that's what it sounds like to me, and I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I'm going to write next, but it's also this will be the first one that's going to require a lot of not a lot of research, but more than I've done for the other two. And so I kind of want to go at that with a little bit more of a clear head. And there's still plenty of anxiety floating around there right now for this one, so to see if anybody is actually going to want it. So that it's a little harder to get back into the process right now. Plus you just kind of need a break. It's this was another emotionally taxing book, so it's kind of nice to just sort of take a little breather.
Final question: how early on did you have the double meaning title of 3/5 for this book? Because I loved it. Because going in, I figured it was going to be primarily the 3/5 compromise notion, and then the booze thing comes up at one point in the book, and I thought, oh, the other 3/5. Okay.
Yeah. But it went, and it is for both, obviously. Yeah. How did I come to it? Is that what you asked me? When did that?
Or how early was it? Back when this was a college screenplay, or was it something you came to later on?
Came to it later on, but still in the screenplay phase. It wasn't the original title, but that part of our country's history is another one of those particularly ugly things where you're actually, the audacity to measure someone's humanity and defining them as a fraction of a person. It felt apropos because Bobby was doing that himself, and the consequences for that were also terrible. And so to me, it felt like an apt title for a story about a main character going through that type of situation.
Yeah, and having an alcoholic mother for whom 3/5 is a weekend.
Exactly.
Yeah, really fantastic debut novel, John. I'm awfully glad Garrett connected us. So I'll be picking up copies to foist off on people. That's another negative of not doing the show in person, because I like to bring books to give to other guests. So I'll have to get your mailing address after this and send you something. But
that'd be terrific.
Again, if that's the only real inconvenience for me in pandemic world, I'm getting by okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But thanks so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to checking out more of your work as you build this writing career, and not getting beaten up by you in any sort of martial arts context. Because basically, I'm like the Samuel L. Jackson character from that M. Night Shyamalan movie. My body would just explode. It would be terrible.
Well, you always have to. You got to remember the from the Karate Kid. It's you train so you don't have to fight. So that's.
I just run away. But yeah, that works too, I guess.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for having me.
And that was John Vircher. Go read 3/5 from Agora, Agora, Agora is the publishing house. I love 3/5. It's available in all the good bookstores. As I hope you got across, or I got across from the introduction as well as our conversation, there's a lot going on in that book. And yet it's for all the significance and social meaning to it. There's a really engaging plot, very tense storytelling. And, I'm very impressed by it. And you can check out John's writing and interviews, essays, etc. at his website, johnvercherauthor.com, which is JohnVercherAuthor.com. He's on Twitter as jvirch75, all one word, and on Instagram, where you can see some of his martial arts pictures too, at johnvercher75. He's also got a Facebook author page at John Vercher Author. Now, in the before time, this is when I would mention my Patreon and PayPal and ask for your support for the show. But we're living in a different world now. My day job pays me just fine. My job is seemingly secure. My expenses are way down on the podcast, so I do not need your financial support. The occasional email, letter, etc. would be nice, but I don't need the adulation. So what I'm saying is, if you can spare any money right now, don't give it to me. Give it to people in need. There are writers, artists, creative people, non-creative people, but people out there with Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever. They need help a lot more than I do. And if you're not comfortable giving to individuals, then there are plenty of worthwhile charities out there. Local food banks, given that the ongoing state of quarantine, isolation, job loss, and everything else. And there's also the need to support bail funds, freedom funds, funds for attorneys' fees, basically things that are tied into the people who were unfairly arrested and subjected to violence as part of the protests against police violence that are going on nowadays. So do your vetting. Go find a good fund to donate to. There are plenty out there. And give. If you can help, please help. As far as what I do and things you can support, just tell people about the podcast. And if you're interested, my zine, Haiku for Business Travelers, I still have 50 or 60 copies available. If you want that, drop me a line or visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and you'll see how to hit me up that way. It's free. You can kick in a few bucks for postage and production if you want, but this is not about making money from my writing. It's just about me sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.